Hey, welcome back to the Think Like a Teacher podcast. This week, we've got Ben Whitaker on the show. Super excited to talk to him. I've only seen him through stuff that I've read on LinkedIn and your podcast, of course. So if you want to take a minute, just introduce yourself and what do you got going on?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on, Sam. My name's Ben Whitaker. I am a former high school teacher in the UK. So I'm from the north of the UK in a little town called Oswald Twistle, which nobody's ever heard of outside of Oswald Twistle, really. So it's a little town in Lancashire, which is about 40 minutes from Manchester in that north of England. I used to be a religious studies and philosophy teacher, and then got into ed tech and technology, and then off the back of doing some of that went lots of squiggly journeys, which might come up in a conversation today. And I've now been the last almost 4 years self-employed as I do a lot of keynote workshops, keynote speaking workshops, coaching around developing ideas, which obviously will come up today. But yeah, full time now, dad to two girls, a 14-year-old and 10-year-old, married 17 years, and yeah, so lots in there, all sorts of cool stuff. But yeah, that my background is as a teacher, but now freelance in that space. I wear a few other hats, and as you mentioned there about podcast, I run the Edgy Futurist podcast. We've been doing that for 9 years, talking about the future education. Interviewed some incredible people. So yeah, podcasting, and we use Riverside like you do to record. So yeah, it's I
Nice.
love this format. I think it's class.
Yeah, it makes it really simple to kind of pretend like you know what you're doing. That's me. Well, awesome. I'm always interested with the teachers that I talk to. My approach to getting into teaching, my journey that got me here is a little bit different, and everybody that I talk to seems to have a different story. So I'm really curious because it isn't, at least in the United States, it isn't necessarily a glorious job. And
Nope.
we're, not making huge amounts in terms of compensation and things. And so I'm curious to know what got you into teaching in the first place.
Well, yeah, great story, a great question, and the story is interesting. So, I had no intention of becoming a teacher. I did well in school, like really well in school, but
Mm.
if you speak to any of my teachers, they'll be like, when I told them I was going to become a teacher, they laughed because they were like, "What, you as a teacher? That is absolutely nuts."
Oh,
But
that's funny.
I'd done youth work, community work. I was thought I was going to go down going into the armed forces as an
Mm.
officer, as a 18, 19-year-old. That was the plan. And then thought about going to university and whatever else. But then I did some volunteering in a school supporting a religious studies teacher up in York, actually. So not even close to home, really. And just fell in love with it. Realised Mr. Graves up in that York school up in York, he just passionate about the subject, passionate about
Mhm.
supporting young people, and I just realised we could make a real big impact on the world and individual people's worlds by becoming a teacher. So decided to go and do that, and
Hmm.
that's how I got into it. It was by default, no
That's awesome.
intention, and
Yeah.
interestingly, my dad had become a primary school teacher whilst I was training to be one.
Oh,
So
no
he'd
way.
qualified. So he'd gone like late on. And then about 4 or 5 years after I qualified, my mum became a teacher. So both my
No
mum and my
way.
dad became primary school teachers later on in life.
Well,
So
that's
yeah,
super cool.
pretty interesting.
Yeah. Well, that's fun. For me, I was not a great student in high school. Like, but for the same token, telling teachers that I had that I was going to become a teacher, they're like, "Oh, that is surprising for different reasons," right? Like I wasn't necessarily convinced that I would finish high school. I mean, of course I would and but it was kind of that mental like, I don't know, school is really hard for me. And the
Yeah.
thought of going to university was like, nope, that's not happening. And in fact, the only reason that I started at a university was because I got a call from this really tiny school. I grew up in Washington State. Got a call from a school on the other side of the United States in Virginia saying, "Hey, you play soccer? We'd love for you to come play for us." I'm like, "Okay, sure." I wasn't planning on it, but I guess I'll go. Um, and and I did poorly. I did so bad. My freshman GPA was like a 1.7. And so like just things went on, and it wasn't until I had transferred schools because that was expensive. Turns out they didn't really want me to keep playing soccer for for them with a poor GPA. So I transferred schools a little closer to home, and I switched, I think maybe through like 3 different majors, and was walking around campus, and just walked into one of the education buildings, and I said, "Hey, you know what? What I had learned at that point, I guess backstory is in practicing for my classes, I got in study groups, and people told me that I was good at explaining stuff. Like once I learned it, I could, explain it and teach it pretty well. And so I'm like, I don't know, maybe that could be a thing that I do for work. And so I just walked into the education building and said, I think I want to do this. And they said, cool, what do you want to teach? I said, I don't know, what are the choices? And just randomly picked biology, which I love because it was the funnest class that I had in high school. But honestly, man, kind of like you, once I got into it and you notice like, wow, this is a big deal. Like
Yep.
teaching is the real deal, and it does make a huge impact, and it has a really great power for making positive change.
Yeah.
And it sucked me in, and I could not imagine being in any other industry um, aside from education. And
Yeah.
so now it's like one of those things like I feel like I'm an okay teacher, but my influence is pretty small. And so if I can help coach other teachers, then my influence to help kids grows and grows. And I wonder if that's kind of a similar thing for you, like getting out of the classroom. What led you to leave the classroom or leave teaching?
Yeah, well, yeah, interesting. Another interesting story. Before I do that, I'm gonna have to just clarify. It's called football, and we invented it.
I apologize.
So we have the name. I'm joking. I'm joking.
No, you
I'm
do.
joking.
Like, yeah,
And the
football. I
irony
just
of
don't want to confuse my American listeners. We're
No,
behind
I'm
the
with you, I'm with you.
times.
I'm with you. And interestingly, I always find it interesting that American football, which you call football, you don't use your feet
You
to
don't
play
like
with it.
2 times in a game. I keep trying to convince people that I talk to, like, hey, you know what we should replace football with? At least replace it with rugby.
Yep.
Because that's a
Yeah.
sport that makes sense. Like
Yeah.
football,
Yeah.
there's timeouts, and you stop, and it's like you go for
The
3 seconds.
big people come on, and the non so big people go off.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. But like,
Interesting. I'm a big soccer fan or a football fan.
Yeah,
In fact,
yeah. Who do you support? Who's your team?
so I'm a Blackburn Rovers fan, which is not like they're not mainstream, obviously, but they did
Right.
win the Premier League back in 94, 95. We've got
Nice.
a game this evening, so I'm taking my daughter
Okay.
there this evening. I've got a season ticket, so yeah, I'm a big football fan. But in answer to the question about leaving the classroom, I got to a point where I'd moved out of like high school into RFE college system, and I was working in there, and there was a few options really, because I'd started doing a little bit of training for Google and for some of the other organisations in that edtech space, and it was looking like, okay, there could be something here. And then I got offered a contract 10 days a month to go and work for an organisation that worked in that edtech space, and it was a too good to be true offer, really, in terms of the compensation for the hours that were being worked. I'm really grateful for the team that allowed me to do that and work with them, and they guaranteed that for 12 months, and then I had then freedom to do with the other 20 days a month what to do, what I wanted to. So obviously I had family and there's a commitments in that space, but then even though there was a lot of travel in those 10 days, it allowed me to then build my skill set. It allowed me to build a network. It allowed me to build a brand and do training. So what was really powerful was people say, "Oh, you're so brave for leaving the classroom because you had a pension and you had a salary, you had holidays, you had." Oh, even though it wasn't, like you said, the best pay, there was a career projection and all the stuff that went with it. But it wasn't massively a brave conversation because. Yes, I had to step out, and I stepped out in 2020 or 2021, which is obviously things were happening in the world, but it was brave with a safety net at the same time. So it was more like a considered brave move.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. And so let's get in then. So you're now in this space where I don't know, would you consider yourself more of an entrepreneur? Like you work for yourself?
Yeah, I
more or
think that.
less.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you've got a couple of things going on. Obviously, you speak at several different places, you travel. The big thing right now, conversation, is the Ideas Guy book coming out. When can we read it? When is it coming out? What should we know? Why should we be excited?
Well, the good news is it came out on Monday,
Oh,
ahead of schedule. We
fantastic.
thought it was going to be a little bit longer, but it came out. It's live on Amazon now, for people to be able to grab hold of that. It's also, I believe, on sale in some of the US places around. Barnes and Noble and others like that. So yeah. So the good news
Oh,
is
man.
it's available.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you. Yeah. So it's been a challenge in the sense that I wrote the book 18 months ago, went through different conversation with different publishers, managed to find a wonderful one, which is based your side of the pond in Canada.
Oh,
And they're a great organisation, Codebreaker EDU. So Brian Aspinall and Daphne and the team have supported that. So I signed a contract with them, and then we've just been going through the process now over the last few months to try and get this out into the world. So
that's
that's
fantastic.
where the book is. That's where we are. We're out.
Great. So, for those of you listening, check Amazon. We'll put links to where you can find it globally, United States. Check it out. I've had the pleasure of reading just through the one pager, which it seems really interesting. So, obviously, you're in the education sphere, the majority of your workload, but it doesn't necessarily seem like this is a book that's just for educators. So, who do you have in mind? And maybe just give us background about what the book is about.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so the book's called The Ideas Guy: Unleash Your Inner Genius. And the principle behind it is, obviously I've come from an education background, but I believe that everybody has an idea or ideas in their minds, whether that is to write a book, whether that is to start a podcast, whether that is to get married, whether that is to speak at a conference, whether that is to go self-employed, start a business, whatever else it is, you've got an idea. And even if you've got a job, you've got an idea of, I want to find some efficiencies, or I want to be able to get into TikTok, or whatever else it is. And the principle of the book is intended to help, whether you're an educator, an entrepreneur, a parent, to give you some ideas from people who I consider to be ideas guys. And the ideas, we'll talk about why the ideas guys isn't a gendered term, but we'll talk about that,
Yeah.
I'm sure. But the principle is that there's 25 people in this book who each one of them has got a story, which we kind of unpack a little bit. And then we find an idea that we can take from their life, and then think about how we can apply that in our own practice. So, for instance, if we've got a conversation with a person like Phil Knight. So Phil Knight was the guy who started Nike, and he even though I've not been able to speak to him per se, he has a whole level of stories about the story with Michael Jordan and others, and about making decisions around why he went to that authentic space, and what he did with basketball and in that. And there's a lot that we take from his life. The kind of idea that I took from his life was, well, we need to pursue our passion, and pursuing passion is something that we can take away. And even though we might not have a shoes business, or we might not have a multi-conglomerate, we can apply that idea of pursuing passion wherever we are in life. So 25 people who have got a story, and then a lesson that an idea that we can learn from them. And that's the purpose of the book, right?
Oh, that's fantastic. And that's been something that's been on my mind recently as well. It's just like focusing and looking at different people that have kind of, I don't want to necessarily say broke the mold, but kind of do things in a conventional way, where it's not just like, yeah, go to university, get the internship, get the job, start in the mailroom, work your way up. I mean, that's like what, people think of when you talk about building careers, but really, yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be said about your unique ideas and how they can become like a lifestyle and ultimately kind of a career for you, depending on, what it is. There's space for everybody. So I love this idea. In writing, what did you find as you were doing your research that was maybe the most influential on your own professional practice?
Yeah, great question. I think if I'm really honest, the thing that I took I'm gonna cheat that question. I'm gonna answer that
Sure.
twice. I think there's two things. The first one is I talk about the concept of psychic dynamite, and psychic dynamite is a phrase that's used by Winston Churchill, who had his own
Hmm.
problems, but and his own things that he didn't do what he's supposed to do. But this is the quote that I use from him in the book. It says, "Every prophet has to come from civilization, but every prophet has to go into the wilderness. He must have a strong impression of a complex society and all that it has to give, and then he must serve periods of isolation and meditation. This is the process by which psychic dynamite is made." And for me,
Mm,
the idea that we've got these ideas, this psychic dynamite, whatever it looks like,
yeah.
uh, we've got to be in the world, and we've also got to be like step away sometimes to go, what could this look
Right.
like? And the principle in the book is that there's a lot of ideas that we can learn from people, but then we've got to step back and think, well, what does that look like in my context? So I would say the psychic dynamite thing is one thing that's definitely influenced what I do. The second bit is that um, everybody's thinking that they've got to have an original idea.
Mhm.
And I've got to come up with the first thing, and I've got to be the first mover, and I get that. But most of us are the sum of a number of parts. So we are not just the product of our parents, but the
Right.
product of our parents, our teachers, our friends, and the society we grew up in.
Hmm.
Even the neighbours. It takes a village and all that stuff that goes with it.
Yeah.
And the key bit in that is that some of the people that I talk about in this book are not whiter than white. They are not the kind of people that you would go, everything about their life is something I want to emulate. But, and this is the bit, that there is still gold and there's still ideas, there's still psychic dynamite that we can get from each one of them,
Yeah.
that we can go, I don't agree with everything that Elon Musk does, but
Sure.
what we can take from him is this. What
Yeah.
that allows me to do in my own practice is to realise that I don't want to throw a baby out with a bathwater, as a term that we would use in the
Yeah.
UK. We don't want to. We don't want to say that. Just because that's awful, we can't acknowledge this. I don't believe in cancel culture. I don't believe in that level of
Right.
what often happens if somebody isn't perfect and doesn't get everything right, because none of us really are under the surface. And so,
Mm.
as ideas guys ourselves, which is the premise of the book, that I want us all to be ideas guys, is that we don't have to be perfect. We can learn from other people and realize that each one of us has got like a bit of psychic dynamite within us that we can make happen and turn into something special.
Yeah. Have you read? There's a book called by Cal Newport. He's a university professor here in the United States called Slow Productivity.
Yep.
Yeah, it's like everything that you're saying. I'm reading it right now as a part of, I'm in the process of writing as well, kind of trying to encapsulate things that I've experienced in my life, and a lot of his principles are just like, oh, that's yeah. So this idea, as you've read it, for those of you that haven't read it, it's a fantastic book. I'll link to that one as well. But he talks about this idea of doing less and working at a natural pace, right?
Yeah.
So we'll talk about, I think the beginning of his book, he opens with this guy who was just laying on a picnic table in his backyard looking at a tree. And he would just like stay there trying to solve this problem in his mind. I think he was a journalist or a writer trying to make connections of all these things. And this idea of like, it doesn't all happen at once. And if we can slow ourselves down, work on one thing at a time at natural paces, and just obsess over the quality of that thing, that's when this, like what you're saying, this dynamite experience happens, where like something really big happens. I think of as well, I've heard of people talking about overnight successes and how it takes around 5 years or more to be an overnight success, because there's a lot that's running under the background that nobody knows about. It sounds like in your book, you talk about a lot of those people and kind of their journeys and how they've become the people who are so influential today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's the element that sits in there is that, without just to use another aphorism, another like
Hmm.
cliched phrase, is that all
Sure.
of us are standing on the shoulders of giants, and that idea that are we are indebted to others that have helped us with an idea, which have helped us to spark something. So even the book, so the title of the book, The Ideas Guy, has come from somebody. Somebody said to me, "What is it that you do?" And I'm
Oh,
like,
yeah.
well, that's a little bit interesting because I wear a few hats. I do a bit of this. I do a bit in education. I support organisations with digital transformation. I tell my story of my ADHD diagnosis. I talk about how my origin story, which is a bit of a story in and of itself. And they went, I still don't understand it. And
So
somebody
you
said to me,
do what?
yeah, you do what? And even my wife, my mum, my kids, they're like, what do you do? So the conversation has almost developed into saying, what we need to do is we need an elevator pitch. So I have a coach, and Stefan, who is my coach, wrote the foreword to my book because I thought there's nobody else that can do that based on what we. And he said, do you know what, Ben? I just think if I were to explain you in a single phrase, he said, you're just an ideas guy. I was like, right. What do you mean by that? He went, you see things differently than other people. You think differently. You use other people. So you'll use a Cal Newport. You'll use a Ryan Holiday. You'll use a Simon Sinek or somebody else who you've got an idea from, and then you'll apply it in a context, and you'll go, and somebody will go, "Oh, wow, that I've never seen it like that before." And what tends to happen is he said that phrase, you think differently. And I was going that way, and I thought, well, there's a certain bloke who features in the book actually who coined that phrase, think differently, and he set up a really big company that some of your listeners might have heard of, that Apple company, right? So I couldn't coin the phrase think differently. I couldn't use that, but what I could do is think, the ideas. And then Stefan went, well, ideas, that could actually stand for something as well, because that explains who you are. So you talk about innovation and new ideas. So you think about new ways of thinking about stuff, full stop. And innovation can be tech, it can be whatever else. You talk about innovation. The D is digital. Everything I talk about seems to be about AI and technology and how that can help our lives. The E is obviously education. That's what it all rests around, because that's where my backgrounds come from. The A is authenticity. So I talk about, I'm really open about my own challenges with my own mental ill health, my own ADHD, my own origin story, my conversations with lots of other people that have struggled in that space, faith, spirituality, all the things that sit in there. And then the S is strategy. So like, we've got to be strategic. A lot of what we do is ad hoc, especially in education, especially in business. We go, let's do this, and then next week we'll go, let's do this. And the conversation has to be about, let's be strategic. And so I help people with strategy. So it's helping people form and frame ideas based on those 5 principles. And I was like, that makes sense. I help people think differently and come up with ideas. Ideas stands for something. Now, when I do an elevator pitch, I can go, they say, what do you do? I say, help people form and frame ideas. And they go, okay, well, how do you do that? I say, well, I do keynote speaking, I run workshops, I do coaching, and I create content. And they were like, that makes sense.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, because you're not just, a content creator. You're not just a writer or a speaker. That checks out. That's really cool. And what you said, I think, is huge about the action phase of all of this, because you're right. In education, I think it's global. I think it's many, many industries. It's easy to come up with like thoughts like, oh, this could be a cool thing to do. That could be a cool thing to do. But really, it's where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. And like, how do you really apply all of these ideas? And is that something that you explore in your book, more like the actionable strategies, or is this kind of more of like the conversation side of it?
Well, it has to be, really, because ideas are only worth any kind of salt. They're only worth anything if we put them into practice. If they stay as ideas, then nobody has a problem with having ideas generally.
Right.
They have problems with actioning those ideas and doing something with it. So each chapter ends with that stay curious or pursue passion. Every single chapter ends with a section that's called applying this in practice. So when we're thinking about pursuing passion, I talk about, this is what you can do to pursue passion like Phil Knight did. Or if you're thinking about strategy and you're thinking about Howard Schultz from Starbucks, his is about leaving an impact. So like applying that in practice, what does that look like? So interestingly, I was acutely aware that I don't have any problem with going, you could do this, you could do this, you could do this, you could do this. Here's an idea, here's an
Sure.
idea, here's an idea. Have you thought about this? But then doing it and giving people concrete steps and framework to do that is the challenge. And interestingly, one of the things that I do, is around is in that coaching space, and I created a framework that's called Frame. That's not in the book, but just as a kind of a side note, to help people then turn their ideas or their problems or their challenges and work through them. So the coaching is then, even though I've not talked about it in the book, that is the natural way to then take your ideas and frame them.
Right. Yeah. So it's just another opportunity of applying what you do in your book to continue to be a resource for people. That's awesome. So as kind of thinking about the future of Ben Whitaker, like what are you hoping this turns into or accomplishes? What are the next steps? Like,
world domination is all I'm hoping for. Okay,
fantastic.
I suppose I've always thought that the book is just another tool that could hopefully help people. I do some conversation cards that I've been doing for a number of years, and I do, like I said, the other bits that I do, the content, and I just feel like this is another avenue in that. So there's a few things on the horizon. First one is to get this book into people's hands, and then to talk to more people about it, and then move into that more of that coaching. And obviously, I've been very fortunate to travel all over. So I've been in multiple African countries, European countries, but actually have not done any speaking or workshops, or I've done some online stuff, but never actually been out to the US other than for holidays. So I was like, what would be. Yeah, so that the conversation really is, I'd love to get the Ideas Guy stuff out into that side of the pond, and talk to people in that space and help people in that space. And then the Ideas Guy book 2 has already started. I've already started writing it. I've got the people that I want to talk about, and then let's just see where that goes. For me, I think us getting ideas from different people and curating those and then turning those into things that we can action into other people's, I think that's just gold. I've got an idea that this could make a massive impact, and then we can do things that make a difference. And I suppose the overarching goal in all of it, if I'm really honest, is the Ideas Guy, the conversations that are in there, people buying a book, people buying journals or cards or doing coaching with me, that's a privileged few who have got some money in their pocket to be able to buy that and to be able to pay for that time. I've always been really passionate about helping others. So what I would love this to be able to do is to be able to put some finance back into helping people who are a little bit underprivileged, help those who are maybe students or learners that we can support with I don't say Ideas Guy School, but Ideas Guy courses that then would, that I would absolutely love to be able to support young people in that space, and those people who are underprivileged. And that's not just like a ploy, marketing ploy, like that, the hallmark of that throughout what I've done life-wise. And I think this is just another opportunity and avenue into that space.
Yeah. Well, I think that it speaks volumes to say that, considering your education background, because ultimately what it all boils down to is, are the things that I'm doing as a teacher, as an educator, as an adult person, is that helping future generations? Because that's the only way to be sustainable, is by helping whoever's coming next. Because it can't just be the few that made it big and now, okay, yeah, we're done. We did it. We had successful people on planet Earth,
Yeah, for sure.
Because there's more people coming always.
Absolutely. And the podcast being called Think Like a Teacher is the idea that we all have something that we can teach to others. And then the idea that we, from a mindset that's, the best teachers that I ever experienced were those people who made learning interesting and engaging, but also it's those people that were continuously learning themselves. And so as a learner in that space, and you're a teacher, you're a learner first, the whole concept there really is the world is shifting, and I know you've spoken to other
Hmm.
people in that space, and
Right.
education obviously is the blood of what I do. If people spoke to my friend Dan Fitzpatrick on the podcast previously,
Hmm.
and when we used to work together, we used to work in the same school, me and Dan, and we were on
Oh,
the
no
podcast
way.
together. So the Edufuturist podcast was started by me and Dan originally.
Oh, that's
So that's
fantastic.
what
I didn't
that's
make
what we
that
did.
connection.
No, did you not? So,
Yeah.
but interestingly, the conversation that we're talking about is that, and I know that he works in that AI space heavily.
Yeah.
The world is shifting, and therefore it's going to require a really different way of doing teaching, a really different way of doing
Right.
schooling, a really different way of doing learning than what we've known up until this point. And the world that we see is not going to be anything like the world that will be in 12 months, 18 months, 10 years. And
Yeah.
therefore, we've got a responsibility to think about things that will last, like ideas and concepts and strategy that then can
Hmm.
go into, okay, well, if we're in this part of the world, or we've got this job, or we haven't got this job, or we've got this population problem or this climate problem, we've
Right.
got a skill set to be able to deal with it, right?
Yeah, that's awesome. And so as we're kind of getting to the end of today, because I know you've got a stack schedule this evening, so I really appreciate you taking the time. If there were maybe just like a couple of tips or strategies for people to apply, just like distill your book down into like quick elevator pitch, how do people get ideas? How do they put them into action?
So the best way to have good ideas is to have more ideas. So that might sound like counterintuitive and oxymoronic, but like thinking through potential options
makes
is
sense.
always a better way, because you start seeing things from a variety of viewpoints. So I think ideation as a concept and spending time on that is really important. The second step there, probably, if I were to turn this into a little bit of a longer elevator pitch, is that most people spend time on solutions and they haven't spent enough time working on what the problem is. And so I hear a lot about edtech solutions or business solutions or finance solutions, and they haven't done enough work, or we haven't done enough work on defining the problem. And I was very fortunate to go to the Google Innovator Academy in 2018 in Copenhagen. And the conversation there was very much like, spend more time sharpening your axe before, rather than starting chopping the tree, the Lincoln quote, right? So that idea that what we've got to do is we've got to spend time making sure that this is really the thing that we want to work on, and that is really the problem behind the problem and the challenge. And therefore, from an ideas perspective, clarifying what that looks like. And I will leave the third element. So I've loads of ideas. Make sure that you are checking that idea is the idea. But the most important thing is this: is that you're not on your own. We can learn from 25 people here. We're all in a community and a society. It takes a village. Reality is, we are better when we collaborate and work together to get better ideas and better solutions to the challenges that we're facing as a world.
Yeah, love that. The more the better. It really does kind of help you see things from a different perspective, the more perspectives you have. It's been a treat. And in line with collaborating and how that's the way that we grow, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you, whether it's to get you to come speak or to collaborate on any kind of project? Where can we find you?
The two best places, really, I'm heavily on LinkedIn at It's Ben Whitaker, just one T in Whitaker, so that's the way to find that. I also have a website called theideasguide.io, so you can find out about that. You can get copies of the book from there, or just find it in Amazon as well. But yeah, so It's Ben Whitaker on LinkedIn and Instagram, Twitter. I'm still in X, whatever it's called now, but also theideasguide.io is probably the best one.
Awesome. Okay, Ben, thank you so much. And for all of you listening, thanks for tuning in. And we'll see you next time.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.